Welcome to the Empowering Tomorrow's Automotive Software Podcast, brought to you by ETOS, a single source of cutting-edge software and hardware solutions that make automotive embedded systems safe, smart, secure, and sustainable. Each episode, we'll be joined by ETOS and industry experts to discuss how electrification, automation, and connectivity are impacting the automotive industry. Now, sit back and enjoy the discussion.
Well, hello, everyone. Welcome to the Empowering Tomorrow's Automotive Software Podcast. I'm your host, Zane Pelletier. I'm an automotive security tester. And today I'm very, very proud to welcome our guest, Tiffany Rad. Today we're going to be discussing topics along the lines of automotive autonomous vehicle threats. We're also going to talk about some supply chain issues and maybe some other manufacturing vulnerabilities, and also get into the nitty-gritty with testing autonomous vehicles in the field, and potentially also what it takes to practice offensive cybersecurity in space. Today, we're very lucky to have someone who has been hacking and defending transportation infrastructure for 2 decades now. Tiffany Rad is the CEO of 2 companies, ELC Networks and Anatrope. She has 20 years of cybersecurity experience, specializing in vulnerability research on vehicle embedded systems, intellectual property analysis, and industry standards and legislation. In addition to her day job, she also teaches cybersecurity at UC Berkeley and the University of Maine. Among her many accomplishments includes her research that was listed as number 4 in top 10 white hat hacks by Bloomberg and was featured in 2013 in the Discovery Channel's documentary, The Real Story, Live Free or Die Hard, based on the movie by the same title. To get started here, I just want to ask you if there's anything else you wanted to tell us about yourself, and a question that I always like to ask people in this field. How did you get into hacking cars? What was kind of the origin story for you? And why are you still so passionate about this after so many years?
Hi, Zane. Thank you very much for having me. Yeah, I very much enjoy this topic, and I teach this topic to undergraduate and graduate students to get more students interested in doing testing of automobiles and other things in critical infrastructure. And as you mentioned, soon space systems. I got into this by I was interested in the idea of what hacking was when I was in college, but later on in grad school, in particular, I moved to the state of Maine, where they have some fantastic off-roading over that's now called we do overlanding. And I had a Land Rover Discovery, and I wanted to make some changes to it, some modifications, and I wasn't really sure if a lot of what I was doing would be legal. So one of the things I wanted to do was I wanted to pursue how the Digital Millennium Copyright Act affected some of the security research I wanted to do on my own car. So I learned a lot through that process and modified my vehicle in ways in which it would be better suited for what I was doing with it, which was off-roading. And then researching and learning about and contributing to, for example, the Right to Repair Act and other pieces of legislation that allowed security researchers and people that were modifying and repairing vehicles to be able to get access to car computers. So the embedded systems, that's one of the times in which I got very into like learning about how they work, what kind of protocols were. That's one of the ways that I figured out a lot of the vulnerability research I've done over the years is researching the protocols and the standards. And here I am, I'm writing standards on a bunch of projects now for automotive cybersecurity. So that's one of the ways in which I got interested in doing this work, and I'm still doing it. I'm still doing modifications to vehicles, and it's a lot of fun. I'm in this industry because I enjoy it very much.
Awesome. Yeah, no, that's a very common, I would say, kind of entry into the domain, right? Somebody has their own vehicle. Maybe they have something that they want to do with it that it is not intended to do originally, or they're modifying it, and they get into going down the road of building their own custom firmware, installing components that weren't originally supposed to be on there. And in order to do that, you need to figure out what's going on with the vehicle network. And I agree that that's probably one of the best ways that you can learn this stuff is by kind of tinkering with something that you have an ulterior motive that you're trying to get at there. So that's very interesting. And I know you've been working in this area for a very long time. So I know that you've also been doing a lot of research looking into and thinking about the idea of kind of the recent proliferation of autonomous vehicles, right? We have things like the Tesla robotaxi, right? That's starting to make its way onto the streets. Waymo is pretty well established. I think I saw that Zoox actually has some of their first vehicles rolled out recently in Vegas. You can actually take autonomous vehicles in lieu of something like Uber or Lyft, right? I guess with the proliferation of all of these autonomous vehicles that are starting to be on the road, how do you think that the, let's say, threat actor that has traditionally been working with embedded systems and maybe trying to do things like steal cars? That's one of the most, I think, common things that a threat actor is looking to do with automotive systems. Either that or, right, either do that or do the modifications to the vehicle similar to what you did when you first got into this. So I guess my question to you, do you foresee kind of a paradigm shift in the way these types of threat actors that target these vehicles are going to adapt their strategy apart from what we see in a more traditional embedded environment, something that you've been working in for a while, right, doing your security research? How would you say that, I guess if you had to make a prediction, I know there haven't really been any that I'm aware of largely publicized hacks on autonomous vehicles, but yeah, I'd like to hear your thoughts on that.
I enjoy doing remote access on vehicles. So with remote access, I look at a lot in the RF spectrum that's being emitted from the vehicle. And one of the attack vectors that people have done, it's been done at DEF CON, it's, Black Hat, it's been very, in the car hacking village, in fact, this is done too, is taking a look at some of the how the communication systems or navigation systems can be affected by someone looking at it from the outside in. Now, I do think with autonomous vehicles and what's up and coming, I think that there's an insider threat concern for a lot of automotive industry and even in the third party manufacturers. If you can get something into the supply chain um, with an insider, that's a big concern. But the looking at the vehicles from the outside in is something that's more of a challenge. In cybersecurity, we usually say when you have local access to something, it's a lot easier. If you're sitting in the vehicle already, a vehicle's been left. I'm thinking of this from the perspective of a car thief, been left unlocked. Someone it's sitting in someone's driveway. You can plug into some things in the vehicles that make it a little bit easier. But when you're looking at from the outside in, taking a look at the different encryption that's used to protect some of the ways in which the vehicle communicates with like over the air updates, I think that this type of these remote attacks, maybe with these vehicles that are autonomous, such as the robo taxi. I saw that in Vegas when I was at DEF CON recently. But I think that this might be a little bit more of a shift, a more remote type of work. But the insider threat, in particular, with a lot that's being used with AI now, with the large language models and trying to what code is going in to program these vehicles. I think that manufacturers in the automotive industry and in all industries are concerned about what are they being used, what's the training LLMs, how that's going to it could be a threat vector that the companies are considering is bad code that's going in or code that's backdoored and so these types of things might get missed, and in particular if there's a great reliance upon AI and maybe less so on the human engineers going through and reversing how these things are working, how well they're working. But I think this is a concern when it comes to the autonomous vehicles, is both the remote threat and also with insider threat in organizations.
Certainly, yeah. I guess that's a perfect segue. I was also going to ask you about so this concept of how do you know what's in your software, right? You hear there's lots of talk of SBOMs going around and figuring out how do I really know what comprises the software that actually goes into the vehicle, right? And the fact that we also have these kind of more dynamic systems that are coming into play now with the machine learning that's happening both on and off the vehicle potentially. I know that there have been some attempts to address this. There is an upcoming BIS rule from the Department of Commerce, and they're looking into enforcing, and let's say also, trying to figure out where the software is coming from and what the affiliation with the organizations that are writing the software. And I would say one of the kind of biggest, most recent events that comes to mind when it comes to the supply chain and manufacturing is what happened recently with Jaguar Land Rover. So they've, for those who are not aware, they've recently had a breach. It actually halted manufacturing for about a month after it happened. I believe it happened at the end of August. And I think that they've been down for a while, but I think that begs the question. The supply chain aspect of the automotive industry is increasingly becoming an attack vector as well. There's a lot of damage, and increasingly there's more exploitation of systems that are not related to manufacturing or automotive that proliferate to these other and threat actors that seem to move laterally through these types of systems. So I guess my question to you: what would you say that the producers of these parts, these end products, these vehicles, right, the suppliers and the OEMs, what can they do to tackle areas that aren't traditionally covered thoroughly when assessing the security posture of an embedded system like a vehicle, right?
Yeah, and I was reading that this is one of the most expensive cyber attacks in the history of the United Kingdom. So it was a big deal. It affected not just Jaguar Land Rover, it was also 5,000 other companies that had contracts with with the automotive, the OEM. And one of the concerns that all those companies had is they started laying off people because of the effects of this large hack. And a loan had to be issued from the UK government. So I've been reading up on this attack, and some of my students are doing, in fact, at Berkeley, one of them is doing research on this for their final project in my class. It looks like it was perhaps related to industrial control systems, although there hasn't been a lot come out yet about this, about specifics of how it happened. It looked like maybe it was a two-tier type of attack, but it's a problem because with industrial control systems, a lot of these systems they don't get updated very frequently, and I think a lot of attackers know this, and it's something that has been researchers have. I've done some research on this too, but researchers have presentations at Black Hat and Deaf Hat about this for over a decade. So, but it's still a difficult problem to tackle. And for the smaller companies that are relying on this, one of the lessons I believe that's come out of this is, and I know it's a difficult one, in particular for smaller companies that make, for example, maybe just the windshield or some other parts that need to go into these vehicles, is is the resilience. And it's just in time is one of the models that has been used for in Land Rover for getting these parts out there. While it's efficient and from a cost perspective as well, the difficulty now is the just in time is immediately all these other companies were affected by this. So perhaps it might not be the business model that they choose to follow with in the future, but it is more cost effective when it comes to manufacturing. So this is, I think, a lesson from that. But the difficult part is the resilience with this. Like when more details come out about how this hack was done, which systems specifically did they attack? Because as of today, when we're recording this, not a lot of details have been released. Here in the United States, we have legislation that's coming up. CERCSIA is one of these pieces of legislation, which is about critical infrastructure protection. And the government in the United States wants to know, and not in days or weeks, but within hours, about whether a U.S. company has experienced a ransomware attack or it's been had a breach in their system. And one of the reasons for this is I think we can learn from what's happened in the UK. Is this piece of legislation supposed to make it a little bit quicker for the U.S. government to react to this and for to notify companies that have dependencies on the company that might have been affected, and so they can get information out quicker so that companies can do some mitigation quicker, in particular if it's spreading through some of the companies that are associated with the original equipment manufacturer, the OEM. And so if it's something spreading, they can quickly decide to stop it or to shut things down, so it doesn't get that. It looks like that's what the company, what Jaguar did, was to stop everything for a little bit of time. Actually, it's been a lot of time in a sense for an OEM to stop manufacturing, but something similar has happened with an Asian OEM as well. That happened last year. So this is becoming more common, I think, in the automotive industry, unfortunately.
Yeah, definitely. And I think you hit the nail on the head there. It's not always about, there's only so much you can do to prepare in terms of defense, right? Also coming into play here is your ability to respond and the incident response, right? Aspect of things. And, I know that they came out with this, they announced it at the end of August. Who knows really how long? I don't know if they know yet how long these attackers are in their system, right? They're still probably picking up the pieces right now and trying to figure that out. And I don't even know if they know yet. Usually, I think these things take quite a bit of time, especially with something of the scale, to figure out the full ramifications and scope of exactly what happened. But I think my takeaway from what you said is, it's having a game plan. It's being able to figure out if something is happening, how quickly can we respond? How quickly can we take certain segments of our network offline, or disconnect certain things so that we can keep it from spreading? And how quickly can we rebuild systems and be able to bring back configurations as they were, or basically come back to life with the manufacturing aspect of things as well as the traditional IT systems. Yeah, it sounds like all of that's very, very important. And there's a lot of talk about that recently, but I don't think really anyone in the automotive space has one clear, cut and dry answer to that. This is what you do, X, Y, and Z, and this will help you be able to respond to something such as this. But yeah, I would say those are all fantastic suggestions, and I think being able to learn from incidents like this is the most critical thing. So something like this, either doesn't happen again, or the effects on other manufacturers, other OEMs in the space, can be mitigated by kind of learning from the mistakes of those that were breached before them. So I know you've done a lot of work also with ICS systems. I know not necessarily in manufacturing, but do you have any particular kind of takeaways for working with industrial control systems and how that might be different than embedded devices? Because I know that some of these systems can be tangential with the types of technologies that they use, but the protocols seem to very wildly, right? And you mentioned that some of these systems are a lot more legacy based and might not be updated as frequently. And I think the biggest thing that I keep in mind when thinking about ICS versus traditional automotive embedded systems is that you're kind of inverting the CIA triad. For a lot of these manufacturers, they care a lot more about the availability of a system rather than the confidentiality and integrity of those systems, which are also important, but I would argue are placed at kind of a lower level of priority. So yeah, I'm curious to hear your thoughts on what exactly your mindset has to be when you're working with those systems, and maybe some of like the differences for someone who is looking at an ICS system versus looking at like a vehicle, for instance, from a security perspective.
Sure, I can explain how I looked at this from coming from looking at embedded systems and looking at accessing things remotely, such as in the radio spectrum, and then switching to an ICS project. This was a long time ago in 2011, but we anticipated it would be a lot more difficult. I guess it's one of the things that my team of 4 people, we kind of set a goal. We knew there were vulnerabilities in these systems. We knew they were in critical infrastructure. So that's one of the reasons we chose to do a research project on this, even right at 0 day. So we thought this would be harder, and in fact it was not at all. So that's, in fact, as you mentioned with the inverted CIA, it was like that. All you had to do was affect accessibility, and now you have a pretty critical vulnerability and exploit. And so it took our team not that long, about 2 weeks, and we were learning everything from ladder logic about how that worked, to get really delving into the program. And it was not too hard. What was a little interesting to us was when we were able to do find the vulnerability, do the exploitation, how many systems this actually affected. Everything from pharmaceutical manufacturing to brakes on trains, pipelines, it was everywhere. So we were a little bit shocked about that as we're doing our disclosures, responsible disclosures to manufacturers and to the U.S. government, talking with them about the how big this was. So this was one of my team. I was the only one that had, well, actually 2 of us had some experience with industrial control systems, but we did think it was going to be a great deal more difficult. So that was 2011, and now you can go to DEF CON and you can go into the villages, and they have where you can do some exploitation of some of the same devices, more modern versions of it that I did a long time ago. But that goes to show that there still are vulnerabilities, and I don't know if I'd call it the low hanging fruit anymore, because it was when we did this, and there have been a lot more design changes to how these work since then. But I still believe that this is a big concern, and it should be, because as was, you talked about the Jaguar, the plant shutting down, and if it was, an industrial control system specifically targeted attack, and we don't know that yet, but if it was, any company that has manufacturing, and if you're making critical parts for, for vehicles or for military systems, things like that, it should be a lesson to be learned about what will happen if that goes down and you have to take it down or it doesn't operate anymore. What types of backup systems you might have in place. So indeed, the incident response, I think, is going to be looked at in coming years about how Jaguar Land Rover reacted and what their incident response procedures were. So maybe my cybersecurity classes will be studying that in the next couple of years once that information. So we'll learn from these. We'll learn from these. Yeah.
Definitely. Yeah. Yeah, completely agree there. Yeah, I have heard the comparison. IT is kind of the backbone. A lot of the information technology systems that are out there is kind of the backbone of communication between all of these networks. But the OT side of things, that's what really drives the real mechanical devices with heavy consequences, right? I mean, I'm going to have to see if I can remember this correctly, but I was reading an article about a gentleman who worked in, I think it was a Tesla manufacturing plant, and he got hit over the head with a robotic arm. I don't think that was a hacking incident. I think it was very basic operator error when it came to those kind of sending commands to those types of devices. But there are still humans on the manufacturing floor. When you think about ICS devices in trains, monorails, industries such as utilities, electrical power plants, right? Those types of things. I think that there's a lot that can go wrong when you combine mechanical force and humans and networks that can be accessed remotely, right? So I think that there is a lot at stake here, and this is definitely something that I don't think there are enough people looking at currently. I talk to a lot of the people in the industry that are responsible for these things, and my feeling is that everyone is kind of trying to figure out how to approach this, and there's not enough people, I think, looking specifically at the OT side. They think that all of the problems can be fixed on the IT side, and I think there might be a more nuanced approach that's required here, to be honest.
I
Yeah.
agree.
Awesome. Well, I'm actually going to shift back a little bit. I did have a question for you regarding because I know you've talked a little bit about remote access wireless attack vectors against. In this case, I do want to bring it back to autonomous vehicles because I think a lot of our listeners are quite interested in the security that goes into making sure that you can't take over let's say a robo taxi and kidnap someone, right, and drive them across town to a location of your choosing, right? Those types of wide scale attacks, I think, are at this point, to my knowledge, purely fictional. We haven't seen one of those in the wild yet. But I was reading that Tesla actually reportedly requested a permit from the FCC specifically to perform radio frequency and also cellular attacks against their fleet of robo taxis prior to the launch of them in cities. And so, to my knowledge, I think this is the first time that we've seen a company request approval from the FCC, at least that I've publicly seen, to conduct electronic warfare style RF testing against autonomous systems. My question to you, do you think that this is an effective testing approach that Tesla is using here? I'm hoping that they're doing other kind of security checks to make sure that, for instance, the sensors that read information and go back to the modules that are responsible for actually steering the wheel, right? Acceleration, braking, that they're checking those things as well and looking at that. But yeah, I guess, do you think this is an effective testing approach? And do you think that, assuming it's being paired with thorough testing of the internal components of the in-vehicle network, that is present on the vehicle, that this is a good way to kind of approach this security aspect for autonomous vehicles from a high level perspective?
I think it's a great way. In fact, I'd be surprised if other manufacturers are not doing the same. I'd expect them to do this. So I many years ago I worked for a startup, and we did this. We did this on vehicles, and we did this on other types of communication devices as well. And we went through the process of getting the FCC license to be able to broadcast. Receiving is different, but when you're broadcasting in those spectrums, you need to get licensed to do that. And we had a limited period of time. We put something in a skiff, and we were lots of companies do this, and it's very important because this is it could be an effective way in which adversaries can disrupt autonomous vehicles. And I know that we're teaching students how to do this as well. So in safe environments that don't interfere with other types of communications. But we do this at the Cyber Auto Challenge, which I know is something that many of your organizations support. But we teach students about how can this happen is the way to describe it, and we actually we do it. So we do it on a very small scale. We don't broadcast more than just a couple of feet, but we show them what it would look like if we were able to spoof GPS, for example. That's one of the things that we do, and it's very effective in confusing systems that rely upon this. So I I am glad to see that Tesla's doing these kinds of tests, and I would expect that from a security team to know this, that this is an attack vector. But it is, as I enjoy doing research from looking at things remotely, remote access is sometimes more challenging, as I mentioned earlier, than doing local attacks on vehicles and systems. But it does need to, it is very important. And as these vehicles are getting communications from the cellular networks and maybe even someday from satellite communications, being able to be sure that you've looked at all the attack vectors that adversaries could implement on like particular vehicles being targeted, a fleet of vehicles being targeted. Remote is really the place to be looking for a lot of that. So I'm glad to see this testing is being done, and I'm not surprised. It's, I think, expected when we're teaching students how to do these things too, to protect, learn how the attacks work, so they can design things to try to be more resilient to these attacks. I don't think it's ever, yeah, well, I don't think we're in security. I don't think it's ever possible to be impenetrable to all types of attacks. I mean, it was designed with access points, things to communicate and work. They're going to be adversaries who are going to exploit those. So this is good to see, and I think many more manufacturers are doing this too. Perhaps not as publicized
Right.
as Tesla's, but yeah, this is a good thing.
Awesome. That's good to hear that you're engaging students in this at such an early age, I would say, in their careers. I think that not a lot of people have the opportunity to get exposure to that, especially, I guess, back in the day, right? Before the Cyber Auto Challenge was formed, right? I think it's more difficult to do that unless you have either the ability to control your RF spectrum within a certain band, control how far you're broadcasting, communicate with the FCC potentially. The only other option is for you to get a vehicle-sized anechoic chamber, right, and get it in there. And those are very hard to come by. They're also very expensive. So yeah, I would say that's amazing to hear that the younger professionals getting into this that are able to get that hands-on experience so early. So I know that you kind of alluded to communication with vehicles, not just over cellular, but with potentially space systems, satellite, and the like, right? I know that when you presented at SCAR, you also were talking about some of the work that you're getting into when it comes to practicing security research and offensive security on space systems. I think that for me personally, and probably a lot of other people that do embedded security in a practical sense, uh, hacking space systems is it's very, very interesting and fascinating, and it also seems very far out of reach, right? It kind of seems like more of a sci-fi type of security research that is somewhat unattainable, right? But I think recently it's become more tangible, right? We've seen events such as like Hackasat at DEF CON for the last few years. I know that there are a lot of satellite hacking groups that are kind of getting into this, both from ground systems and then also looking at the electronics that we're actually shipping into the outer atmosphere, right? I guess my question to you for this would be for anyone who is interested in or looking to do security research in that area, what kind of skill sets would you recommend for anybody who's trying to break into that, into aerospace offensive security? I have heard that a lot of space systems like use either CAN or automotive Ethernet, right? Two-wire protocols, because when you're launching stuff into space, every gram counts, right? And having less copper in the networks that are actually connecting the components or even the boards, the chips on the boards that they're sending up can matter. So, do you think that having a skill set such as being able to hack cars, do car hacking, and working with vehicles can translate effectively to looking at embedded space systems?
I absolutely do. And I'm glad you asked this question because the Cyber Auto Challenge is has other challenges as well. They have one called drone. And that's one where you take a look at, as I mentioned, GPS spoofing. What can you do to change the operation of a drone? And these are pretty big drones. These aren't little toy drones that you can buy. These are very large commercial ones as well. And so this these challenges are great. So if you're a student and you're listening to this, check out the Cyber Auto Challenge, the Drone Challenge, and I'm working on helping them get one for space coming up pretty soon. We're hoping in the next couple of years. Although now is the time to be learning about space systems. That industry is growing significantly. When I first started in automotive cybersecurity, I was early, I think, on the scene 20, a little more than 20 years ago, actually, at this point. And I remember going to a conference. I was working with someone. We gave a presentation at DEF CON. This is a very large conference. We had only 3 people there, and one of the questions we got is who cares about securing cars, this, who cares about like learning about the networks and the embedded systems. Well, here we are many years later, and now we have the village at DevCon where you can go try these things out. So if you're interested in learning about space systems, I would say if you're a student, check out the Cyber Auto Challenge, the Truck Challenge. There's one for tractors and drone, and they're coming up with one for critical infrastructure too, which will include ICS, industrial control systems. All of these things will be useful if you want to work in space, cybersecurity, that kind of thing. It's again, you'd be very early in the field. I know there's some people that do this now. It's still a little bit early, but that's a good time to get in and a good time to learn about these systems. And the way you can do that is automotive, as you mentioned, is very similar. So that's where I'm taking some expertise and thinking about this, about how that can be transferred over to space systems and space system cybersecurity. They face other some pretty big challenges too. There's a race now to get to the moon, and there has been some discussion about maybe the U.S. will not be the first to get there. It's going to be really close between the U.S. and China, and there are some concerns about this. And I don't think this is just like an ego type of well, we need to get there first. There are resources on the moon, and the way a lot of the treaties work right now is if your country or your private company can get there, you can mine it, and it's going to change. It's really going to change the way that we look at industry moving off this planet to the moon and to into Mars eventually. So the concern is not just first to get there, but the resources, and some of these resources are quite valuable here on Earth as well. So I do believe that there's an adversarial concern about insider threat is a big deal for these space companies as well. So concerns about, just theoretically, if a country could set back another by even 6 months to a year, that country may not be the first one to get to the moon and to send miners to the moon. So private companies, not just NASA, have to, are concerned about this. So it's a security concern, but I do think cybersecurity is one of those as well, because one of these systems failing not only could it be concern for life, for astronauts that are working and living in space, but it's also a concern for the vehicles, the launch vehicles, the rockets, and making sure that all the code that they put in is what they intended. Again, I'm concerned also about a lot of AI being used for these systems potentially, and what is going into the things that make it to production, and do you know about everything that's in there and how it functions. So cybersecurity is going to be very big for space systems. It is now. I mean, look how quickly these systems are going. I mean, I'm heading down to Florida this week actually to speak at a conference at Kennedy, and I'm talking about cybersecurity in education for space
Oh, wow.
systems. So it's an education conference where a lot of university and even high school instructors are there, learning about changing your curriculum, different types of resources we can use, and even putting up CubeSats so students can do something like Hackasat outside of DEF CON, and universities putting these up for a hackable satellite. So I'm going to be pitching that this weekend at the conference. But one of the importance of doing this is being sure that our critical infrastructure is protected. And I do believe that this should be considered. It is considered part of this as our critical infrastructure, as the United States is putting great private resources and government resources into science and exploration, and also mining, and is going to be a pretty big business in the future, off of Earth. So I've gotten interested in this. So because of I've always had an interest in this field, but when I realized how similar the embedded systems and the networks are, I realized this is great. This is my chance to pivot to a little bit. I'm not pivoting out of automotive, but doing a little bit of a pivot to learning a lot more about these systems and creating a curriculum that I'm going to offer to the two universities at which I teach, and other universities as well. But a cybersecurity for space systems, and we're going to be covering policy and law, because I did this with automotive as well. Is learning how far you can go with some types of research before you're either breaking criminal laws, and understanding the policies associated with accessing systems, I think is important for when you're doing cybersecurity research or creating products for defense.
Wow. It almost makes me want to go back to school just so I can take that class. That's wow, I would sign up for that in a heartbeat. That's amazing. Well, that's
Excellent.
yeah.
Well, we might have a cyber auto challenge, something like that, but for a space
Uh-huh.
challenge coming up. And so students, even on the graduate level, will get an opportunity to test some of these systems for free. That's the way the challenges work. You just got to get yourself to the
Amazing.
location, and then it's a week of free, about like 12 hours a day of classes, and
Yeah.
then 2 days of hands-on. That's a big part of the program, is hands-on hacking of these systems. And then at the end, you do a presentation on how you would recommend how the remediations might work. How would you design this differently, better to protect what you just exploited? So it's very exciting, fantastic model for learning.
Yeah, amazing. Just for general knowledge, I guess, is this where physically is the drone challenge located? Is that also going to be in the same location, or are they kind of dispersed geographically?
This is in a different
Okay.
location. The past 2 years, it's been in Michigan,
Okay.
but it's been on a military
Oh,
base.
wow.
So I don't know about the plans for the future, but the last two were on a base, and you're able to work on military components on that
Ooh,
facility.
very
So
cool.
really, I mean, for a civilian, these are great opportunities that you don't often get. So Carl Heimer and his team have put together, and I was involved in the very first, like the planning of the Cyber Auto Challenge in 2000, I think it was 2012, but the team has really worked to create a very unique opportunity. We can't take as many students as we'd like to, but there are 4 or 5 challenges now that you can attend over the summers when school is out. So if you're a student, check out the Cyber Auto Challenge, and then if you're interested in trucks, that's one I'm looking at doing next summer. Those are part of critical infrastructure too. Very interesting program.
Amazing. Wow. These are all fantastic opportunities. So yeah, for any of you listening who are students or looking to get into these types of things, I highly recommend checking that out. That's you know, I think this is one of the best opportunities out there to be able to get exposure to something like this. And these, I like you were saying, Tiffany, space systems, critical infrastructure. This none of this is going away anytime soon, right? Uh, Even from a perspective of really interesting protocols and also equipment that you can get your hands on and start looking at how to break stuff. This is really an interesting area to be in, and I think over the next few years we're going to see some really cool research being done, and also probably some scary incidents happening. Because like you said, I mean, you can try your best, but there's never going to be a complete 100% guaranteed security posture for any of these things. So it's really it's an evolving battle, I think, on both sides. Well, thank you so much, Tiffany, for being with us today. I really appreciate the good conversation. I mean, we covered so much. We talked about vehicle hacking, actually doing testing against autonomous vehicles. We've talked about critical infrastructure, space systems, manufacturing, right? So thank you so much for being here. Do you have any closing thoughts that you have? Anything else that you wanted to share with us and our listeners?
I just want to say thank you very much for having me, and I enjoy talking about these topics. And it's an ever evolving field, as you mentioned, and there are a lot of job opportunities in this field, despite or even including AI. So I do think that this industry is still going to continue to grow. So thank you very much for having me.
Yeah, of course. Of course. Thank you so much for being here. Well, to everybody listening, thank you so much for tuning in to this episode of Empowering Tomorrow's Automotive Software Podcast. We certainly hope that you found our discussion insightful and valuable. If you've enjoyed today's episode, don't forget to subscribe on Spotify, Apple Music, or wherever you get your podcasts. Feel free to share this episode with your network and leave us a review. We'd love to hear your feedback. This concludes our episode. Please check in again for another one soon.
Thank you for joining this episode of the Empowering Tomorrow's Automotive Software podcast. Please leave a comment or review with your feedback or what you'd like to hear in future episodes. To learn more about automotive embedded systems and ETAS's capabilities, visit our website at ETAS. That's ETAS.com.